Hello, everyone, and welcome to Producing Events in a Pivotal Year. We are once again pleased to have veteran technology writer and TVNewsCheck contributing editor Glen Dickson here to moderate the webinar. Take it away, Glen.
Good afternoon. I'm Glen Dickson, contributing editor for TVNewsCheck. Probably no segment of the broadcast industry suffered a bigger blow from the COVID-19 pandemic than sports production. As all big league sports in the U.S. shuttered in early March, and other major events like the Masters, Wimbledon, and the Olympics were postponed or canceled altogether. Fortunately, mainstream sports production resumed this summer with a myriad of new social distancing rules and restrictions, including empty stadiums and arenas for most events. Network field operations and mobile truck vendors are coping with these challenges by employing a variety of remote production techniques and exploiting the power of IP connectivity. Today, we'll discuss the new playing field for TV sports with a panel of event production experts. Joining me this afternoon are Brad Cheney, VP of Field Operations and Engineering for Fox Sports, Janelle Fleming, Director of Sports Sales for LiveU, Don Roberts, VP of Sports Engineering and Operations for Sinclair Broadcast Group, and Phil Garvin, President of Colorado Studios and CEO of Mobile TV Group. For the audience, we'd like to make this experience as interactive as possible. There are some poll questions that will be popping up on your screen. Please use the Q&A function to ask questions of our panelists, which we'll address toward the end. If you're having any technical issues, please use the chat function to reach out to TVNewsCheck publisher Kathy Haley, who is helping manage the event. And I guess to start off with, what kind of access are you being afforded at the different sports venues today compared to before COVID-19? And, in terms of the size of staff that you're allowed to have on site, and how much do those rules, restrictions change on a day-to-day basis? Brad, maybe you can weigh in on that first.
Yeah, so, we're definitely placing less people, at Fox Sports on the ground to produce our events. We're leveraging a lot of new technologies that allow us to put people, either large portions of them in what we term HRPs, home run productions, in our LA or Charlotte network centers, and or, providing outsourced resources to people at either their homes or our network centers to help kind of reduce the amount of people on site. And so, we're doing that in two ways. And then the first one being that, the leagues and our partners have asked us to find a way to do this with less people on site, because less people on site means less people interacting, which means less possibility of any kind of spread of illness that's out there. And so as well, every one of the leagues has developed and done a great job with their safety protocols to say where our staff can be and where our staff can't be. And what used to be an easy thing for Major League Baseball, for example, to walk in the left field gate and walk through the warning track and down the side of the field to get to a low camera or another position down there, is something that doesn't happen anymore. And we have to go through the stadium and go through health checks before we do some of those things. So while our ease of movement, our freedom of movement in those facilities is definitely restricted at this point, we're still able to get our jobs done and get to the places we need to be, which is all in all, the goal of what we're trying to do here is provide access and a couple of hours of enjoyment in most cases, especially if your team wins, for you at home. So that's our goal there, and we've been able to work with our league partners to do those things, albeit the walk might be 5 minutes longer now to get to your camera or place a microphone in the stadium. But we feel that the experience, at home is the same.
And just in terms of numbers, how many people are you actually bringing on site for like an NFL production compared to what you had before? And how many more staffers are working remotely compared to before?
We're down about 20% on things like NFL, but if you look at Major League Baseball, we're down, and NASCAR was down, upwards of 50%, being remoted off site. So, each sport that we deal with does it a little differently, and it depends upon what we can actually accomplish, on a daily basis, and, what we've got built up in our network centers to actually support broadcast. So, you look at a college football weekend. Last weekend, we had 3 games, and 2 of them were done on site with a couple of people missing. from it. So probably down in that 20% less people on site range. And then the other game was done as a home run production for us. And so it was well underneath 50% of what normally would be on site. So, you know, it kind of ebbs and flows is what we're able to actually accomplish in these locations and these places going forward to do so. So it really just is, you know, kind of a game day decision for us. It's not really game day, but, you know, in a planning sense, it's game by game that we look at these things in order to do as much as we can from our network centers, you know, to reduce the amount of people on site that need to travel or even show up at a venue.
Okay, thanks. Don, what's been your experience with the Sinclair RSNs and Tennis Channel?
Yeah, I mean, the RSNs are pretty much what Brad said. I mean, for baseball, you know, there's positions like dugout cameras, low cameras that, you know, the credentials for crew are different now. Not everybody can be in a dugout, for example. Not everybody can be right on top of players. So you augment that with robo cameras, perhaps, instead of man cameras. So we still bring the most of the complement of a crew to on site, but and Phil can talk to it a little bit perhaps later, but you know, we split them out into 2 trucks now, for example. We don't put everybody in a truck. You know, and Phil's got some technology that we use and have in the past to make that to make that happen. On the tennis channel front, for example, right now the Roland Garros French Open is gonna we flew people there last week to cover that, and that crew and travel people we traveled is at least 50 to 60% less than we have in the past, because we're just, you know, first of all, you got to get people out of the country. And secondly, the way we're going to cover that and handle that is more of a world feed type thing than a very specific tennis channel production. So it's dramatically different than it has been in the past. And tennis so far this year has been that way on any of the matches and tournaments that we've covered. They're much smaller groups of people that travel to these things and cover them for us.
Yeah, Don, you know, there's a follow-up to that. You know, perhaps some of our audience didn't see it, but I think some of the first live, you know, mainstream sports, there were a lot of sports that you maybe wouldn't normally see on TV, cornhole and other sports like that were some of the first live stuff covered this spring. But tennis was one of the first things to come back with, you know, some of the same pros you see on the ATP and WTA tours. Can you talk a little bit about those tournaments down in Florida?
Yeah, in Florida, yeah. So those were done with, I don't want to minimize it, but it was basically at private courts and at people's homes, albeit large homes, but you know, that's where they were. And again, small crews, small production truck, you know, with you know, 4 cameras, 5 cameras, and maybe, you know, 6 or 8 people total for the crew. And we were able to successfully produce tennis. Again, it was a vacuum of sports at that time, and the experience wasn't exactly the same as it always has been. But you know, for folks like you, Glenn, who enjoy tennis, it was, you know, it filled that void for you, and we were able to produce content when it was very difficult to do anything. So and that was a lot of coordination with players and with specific you know, tennis organizations to actually do that. So, but you know, the U.S. Open in New York, you know, nobody was there, right? It was a big empty place, and it's changed the face of how we produce tennis for sure. And we're going to see what next year brings, but we still have a full schedule of events that we're planning to cover with tennis. Same thing with all the RSNs, with, you know, with MLB, NHL, and NBA. We're keeping our fingers crossed that we can produce all of that content in probably some way different than we have in the past, but you know, maybe a little better than what we're doing today.
Yeah, thanks. Phil, what, you know, from perspective of some of your other customers, and as a mobile vendor rolling units into venues, what is, you know, what's access like? How much more challenging is it to get your truck set up and all of that? How many hoops you have to jump through?
Well, that part is it's not that hard, but you don't move much. So, Jen, if you bring a truck into a baseball venue, which we did, towards the end of July, as a result of the pandemic, we're probably not going to move that truck until, well, yesterday, or the day before yesterday, at the end of the season. And anybody who wants a feed out of that venue for a game, an MLB game, is using us. And so there's not a lot of moving in and out, and that's very helpful in controlling personnel and controlling flow of the disease. So in that sense, it's been sort of more stable.
And how many?
And we do have a problem, like if there's severe limits as to who's actually able to go into the venue. So if we have a technical problem with a piece of equipment that's in the venue as opposed to in the truck, there's very limited number of people that can go in there and deal with it. And so that's been a little bit of a problem.
Okay, fair enough. Janelle, can you talk about, were some new applications for LiveU's contribution technology that hadn't been used before, or different sports that were using you guys to do live feeds for the first time?
Yeah, sure. So, we provide portable video encoders that use bonded cellular to transmit signals back to a control room or to the cloud. So traditionally we're used, as you guys probably know, is for news and ENG like services. So our, sports sort of brand and rollout was very popular sort of in a non-linear OTT network. So we've done a lot of rugby and lacrosse and wrestling and golf, all streaming. So, and doing it either as a primary transmission or REMI style. So this COVID sort of pivoted us a little bit because the networks and the linear broadcasters became a little bit more reliant upon us in the sports world to do different things, sort of hybrid REMI production workflows with talent being at home, putting a portable video encoder with some resiliency as far as bandwidth made a lot of sense. And even doing some unique sports where, because the staff had to be reduced on site, our solution really made a lot of sense. So we were, instrumental in some of the stuff that you might have seen when sports was canceled, like cornhole, some golf stuff that we've done. So we've seen a huge increase in usage, even in our, news and sports combined. LU Smart, which is our smart app, went up 400% in April, which is incredible. Even the sort of average session time, which is, we usually average what each user uses is normally 15 minutes, like a news hit. It went up to an average of an hour of streaming. So it's pretty incredible to see, especially with sports being so, it's been in this transition to start looking at IP technologies and sort of unmanaged network solutions. So to see some of these broadcasters take us up on what we've been telling them to do was exciting to see, even in this sort of uncertain time. So yeah.
Yeah, thanks. Brad, how you mentioned forming plans for covering these different sports. How good a job have the leagues done in communicating changes with their social distancing requirements and providing COVID-19 updates? We had an update today from the NFL with some players testing positive. But can you talk anecdotally about we had several incidents with baseball? How well was that managed, and what was the communication flow like?
Yeah, I mean, the pre-conversations that exist were really great. Each one of the leagues, as we walked through everything that we did, we walked through together about what our plans were, what their plans were. You talk about baseball, it wasn't just ourselves at Fox having a conversation with baseball, it was our partners at Sinclair, it was our partners at ESPN, it was, kind of everybody talking together. And so that's the important part of what was happening, was that we were all talking together to find the best solutions for all of the people out there, not just the players, not just the TV staff that's there on those shows. And so that was all really, really good. What you end up finding out though as things happen is that honestly in the morning sometimes Twitter tells me where the hot spots are, because there's no way to get that stuff out fast enough that's not hitting a reporter who's got a Twitter account who's got those things. So just like we saw this morning with the Titans and the Vikings out of NFL, we're starting to learn things about what's happening in the NFL. And we learned the same things, during college football, where we, 2 weeks in a row, we were supposed to go to Baylor. The first week, the first team actually backed out, and the second week it was Baylor's issue. And so, we got two football games canceled 2 weeks in a row, the same stadium, which is something that you would never bet on in your life, from that standpoint. And so baseball was the same way, in that, some of that information is actually coming out faster than the league can actually get it to us and be partners with us in what's going on. The real step behind it is actually understanding what the real challenges are and how we can all pivot to make these sports continue to happen. And so the best part about that we've said is that it's about having a conversation and not drawing a line in the sand, but defining a line and defining a way forward so that we can all figure out how we can interact with that policy, knowing full well that in a week or two it's going to change, or a day or two it's going to change. And that's been, as we've continued to learn from everything we learned starting in mid-April and getting NASCAR back and Don and the team getting tennis back and all those other sports kind of following along suit, that, okay, now what do we do to continue to move forward? And what did we learn at NASCAR, and got shared with what they learned at tennis, and it got shared with what the people learned on the PGA Tour when they launched that, which then helped baseball out, which then helped basketball and hockey start, and gets us to fall sports. And you can see that there's not one answer here. And I think that the biggest piece of not one answer there being is what both the Big Ten Conference and a number of other conferences said about not bringing football back initially. That some said that we felt good about it. We have schools and areas that feel good about it. We think we have a good plan for this. And the other said, we don't think maybe we have that, or maybe we don't trust what's coming out. But, the science changes every single day. We learn something new about what's happening here and how to better protect our people and how to better interact. And we'll continue to see what happens there from that front. But, I will say that, all the league partners that we've dealt with have been really great to work with and have been very open about what's going on, because, I don't think any of us really know what the end game is.
Yeah. Just to follow up on that, were you in a position for any events where you had crew on site and then had a last minute cancellation?
Yeah, I mean, we were one of the last college basketball shows to air on the last day of college basketball season this year. So we made it through a first half in the Big East tournament, and then we've had a number of other instances where people were either en route or on site, and games have been canceled. We had full set day in Baylor, and that got canceled the first week. Trucks were set. The crew, about half the crew was in setting up for the game, and we packed the crew up and honestly packed the crew up and packed the truck up and sent it to, sent it north to do a different game. We've had a lot of that happening lately, and we expect it to happen. To be honest, we're built for it, and we expect it to happen, and we've added people to make sure that we have an opportunity to succeed by doing so. But our crews are bigger this year because of that, to make sure that we're supporting everybody correctly.
Okay, thanks. Don, what's been your experience in terms of communication with with leagues, with MLB, and also I guess with the tennis tours in terms
Yeah,
of...
I mean, like Brad said, I mean, the leagues were very communicative up front. I mean, there was a plan in place, and but then all plans are meant to be thrown to the side at some point. I mean, everybody knows personally and professionally, I think, not just the panelists here, but everybody in life knows that this is an ever-changing situation. And certainly I don't want to turn this into any kind of political discussion, but on top of COVID, there was also other things going on in this country that stopped some games from being played.
Right.
So we had, like Fox, I mean, we had crews ready to go. They were there on site. And then, the game wasn't played for one reason or another. from a tennis perspective, Indian Wells is a relatively large tennis tournament that takes place in Palm Springs, California.
Right.
We had we had a whole crew there. Phil had a truck there. I mean, we were prepared to produce tennis, and it was not to make it about me, but my plane landed and I got a text that said the Indian Wells was canceled. So, you know, you turn all those people around and then send them home. I mean, there's absolutely a cost associated with that. But, and that was before anybody knew anything about this. I mean, it was literally in the first week in March where, you know, it's like, well, what do you mean it's canceled? Now what are we going to do? So, you know, from that point forward, communication's gotten a whole lot better. We've learned a whole lot. You know, like Brad said, we learned from each other. The leagues have learned a whole lot. And it changes. It's been an evolution from when you look back at what happened at Indian Wells to where we are today with NFL. You know, it's much better than it was, but then you look at what's going on today with NFL, and it's, you know, players get sick, and all of a sudden, you know, it's a different situation where maybe you have games that aren't going to be played this weekend because of something that's happening, and it'll happen next week and the week after that, you know, because people are exposed to who knows who. So, you know, we're doing the best we can to control the things that we can control. I mean, that's I think the best way to explain this, and a bunch of it you just can't. You know, you have to be flexible enough to roll with the punches, and that's what we're certainly doing.
Well, that's a good, you know, a good segue. I want to ask Phil, from your perspective, have you rolled out different mobile units or different setups to facilitate social distancing for your customers? And, you know, and what are you doing within the vehicles themselves to keep personnel safe?
Sure. Yeah, where we might have sent 2 mobile units or an A and a B unit at least, when there's a home and away production at an MLB game, for example, we would only need normally 1 if we're just doing a single feed like a world feed. But in order to achieve social distancing, we roll out 2 units, and our units are actually designed to work together, and so they could separate out personnel. In addition, so, you know, achieve considerable social distancing. You could put half of your replay operators in the first unit and the other half in the other unit, and so on. The other thing we've done is build dividers, infamous plastic dividers between people. Even when you could keep them 6 feet apart, we would still put in dividers to enhance the social distancing.
Are there any particular functions, you know, job functions or equipment areas within a live broadcast that are particularly challenging from social distancing point of view?
Well, yes, I'm glad you asked. The video shading area, by definition, it usually has 2 or 3 people. In most places, you can't have more than 6 or 7 cameras being shaded by 1 person. Shading means adjusting the camera, the light, the dark, the color. And you really need at least 2 people in there, and they need to share the program monitor, right? Because they all want the cameras to match. So if you don't have a central point of reference for all of them, they're not going to match perfectly. And so by definition, they have to be close together. And so for that area, we built a more fancy kind of divider that can move around, right? Each client might want to set up their shaders differently. So we had to create a divider that was able to slide into different positions.
Oh, that's cool.
Fortunately, we build all our mobile units ourselves. So we have a whole factory full of, you know, carpenters and metal workers and all kinds of people who can crank these things out.
Yeah, I know you're better set up for doing that than like an elementary school. For my observation, your stuff's probably set up better. You know, you mentioned world feeds. You know, Don, maybe you could explain for people in the audience who aren't familiar with that, what that means, what's new about the use of those this year versus pre-COVID.
Yeah, so one of the primary differences with world feeds are that they're designed to be generic for both home and away teams. So, you know, when you're producing an MLB game, there's certain expectations that your viewers have that, you know, you'll favor your team. The shots will favor your team, the announcers will favor your team, and when you have to produce a home feed for both home and away, you lose most of that because it has to be very down the middle, neutral, not favoring one player, one team, or the other. So from a production perspective, it changes it a lot, actually. From a technical position, it doesn't really, because it's, you know, you still have the same camera shots, same graphics, same everything else. But you know, the way the game is produced is actually different. And you know, the visitor team has the ability to augment with more cameras and some other components. But for the most part, it becomes a very generic vanilla kind of program that, you know, some home viewers may not appreciate it as much as they do they want the slant to be towards their team. Unlike news, it's okay to do that in sports, but
Right. Well, you do have sometimes that your networks will bring in additional cameras, correct?
Right. So the away teams there's always more cameras, but you know, the way baseball's produced is if you watch it very closely, and especially in a home environment, it's very, I won't say very, but there's always a twist that it's favoring your team. That's what the viewers want. That's what the owners want. That's kind of how it works.
Fair enough. And Brad, from your perspective, what's different about working with you know, home feeds this year? Or is more of the video you're pumping out coming from an RSN for different games because of COVID?
Yeah, I mean, during baseball, you know, we were required on anything that wasn't our exclusive broadcast, which are, about 26 games this year that we did on our Saturday baseball. You know, we worked with the regional sports networks, and obviously a majority of them used to be in our own family. So I will say that we benefited a little more than everybody else did, because, you know, their look is the same as our look. There are some, you know, easy benefits for us to deal with in that realm and producing, you know, the World Feed baseball. And like Don said, it's very challenging. We do a lot of World Feed production, as do the team at Sinclair with Tennis Channel. We do it for soccer, where it really is a vanilla broadcast. It is straight up vanilla, and it's not vanilla with a little bit of flavors of home. It's really as vanilla as it gets, and it's a little easier to deal with. And you know, I think that everybody did a phenomenal job this year with Major League Baseball and producing shows that allowed the home show to have some of its feel, while also still protecting the away show, and ESPN and Fox and TBS, who are taking feeds, and MLB Network as well, are taking feeds to produce another version of that broadcast. But, you know, it definitely, you know, doesn't necessarily live up to what our fans want to watch, or what the home show or the away show fans want to watch either, you know, on their broadcasts. And so, you know, it's something that the American television market has, really kind of grasped onto, is providing differentiated feeds for, you know, people who want to watch one side or the other of something happening, which is not necessarily what happens around the globe, to be honest with you. And so, we've done that. We sell that, you know, whether it's advertisements and all other kind of things that happen. But, you know, it all comes down to the storytelling, and it's very difficult to tell a story that's different than the story being told when you only have 2 additional cameras to tell it with. We do hope that we get back to the day where we have more ability to do things. And I'm sure that, Don and the team at Sinclair and the regional sports networks there, I would assume agree as well that, telling a story is what we all do. We're there to tell stories, whether it's we work in news or sports or entertainment. We're all storytellers, and to be able to tell that best story usually needs a little bit more equipment.
Fair enough. I noted at the top of this, one of the most unique things is that you don't have fans at most of these venues. And we actually have a poll question about, has a lack of fans in the stands diminished your enjoyment as a home viewer? And 61% said no. We also had a couple questions about the approach to audio and video out of these empty stadiums. So I guess, the first question, why is Fox, what was Fox's philosophy about having some, pre-produced audience audio and also some of the virtual graphics you've done for fans? I'm going to ask about that and then ask Don how Sinclair's handling it.
Sure. Our kind of thought was, obviously we started out NASCAR, and you don't need a lot of audience sound and or pictures of audience when you have cars that make more sound than anybody knows what to do with. Right. So as we kind of headed towards baseball and some other sports, we realized that, in essence, NASCAR kind of felt the same. And how are we going to make it feel the same for somebody watching a Major League Baseball game? And, look, the sounds of the crowd and having a crowd, we thought, helped people escape reality a little more and get back into the nostalgia of watching baseball and doing so. And so, we continued to kind of play on that theme to do so. And so, we felt that as much of the experience as we could get was that the game was more exciting if you had a little bit of a crowd inside of it, that you felt like there's a crowd there. I mean, there are a lot of times that all of us are there, and you start talking about multi-generational viewing experiences where it's you and your children, or you and your father or mother, or, or uncles or what have you, kind of watching together. In some of these cases, talking about it, and maybe you're not fully paying attention to the game. Maybe you're playing on your iPad. Maybe you're watching a second game on an iPad, which is what we actually hope you're doing. But as well, that the sound of the crowd reacting to something happening pulls you back into the game, and those things are important, we feel, for our broadcasts, and we've done it across a lot of our sports, that the fan experience helps raise the excitement of the broadcast. And so that's what we felt was really important. And so we did more than what the leagues are providing in many cases. And we feel that it helps remove people from the reality of staying in your home and not going out to dinner and things like that, and provide you an experience for a couple of hours that is enjoyable.
Thanks. Yeah, Don, what is Sinclair's point of view on this? With I know some of the baseball coverage is very different, but can you talk about your approach?
Yeah, I mean, baseball is a little different because, baseball, basketball, and hockey, because the leagues provide that sound, that audio, and they for one of the reasons they provide it is they pump it into the stadium for the players. I mean, it's an important thing for the players as well, for them to feel as if there's reaction for them. And we typically are just picking up that audio from the stadium. We're not augmenting it with anything else. So in Chicago, for example, the stadium production crew is the one who does that audio. And that's all we do. That's all we use. We're not going any further than that. NHL, started out in one way, really pushing it, I think in part because of the players and maybe some of their colorful language. I think, there was a start, it kind of went one way, maybe a little too far, and some of the leagues dialed it back a bit. But, we like I said, we take just what the leagues are providing us, and that's it. We're not going to the extent that Fox is and Brad's group.
And you haven't done anything visually in terms of virtual fans or anything like that?
No virtual fans, no Zoom walls, none of that stuff. So, and we're pretty comfortable staying where we are with that.
What has the viewer feedback been like on that? I mean, we were talking about this in one of the prep calls. The only sport where I really noticed how quiet it was tennis. Particularly while watching, it wasn't your coverage, but watching like the U.S. Open final, like that was the sport that stood out the most at how quiet it was. But I imagine maybe some viewers might prefer that you can hear the players more and maybe hear.
I think it depends on the sport. I think it's like anything. It's some people love it. I think it's one of the poll questions. It'd be interesting to see what the answers are. But
yeah, we have it up right now.
Yeah, some people love it, some people hate it. I mean, it's because it's it is clearly not real when you see a stadium or a venue that has nobody in it, but yet you hear people. But or there's cardboard cutouts and seats. They're not
right.
Noise, but personally, I like Brad said, I think it enhances the experience as a viewer. I personally, I think it's a great idea. Having played any of those sports, maybe minus tennis, is part of that experience is that crowd sound.
Thanks. Well, I have other questions, but we do like to take some questions from the audience along the way, and I have one. One for Janelle, but anyone else could weigh on this. We were talking about using, IP contribution more than ever before. And someone asked if the proliferation of everyone using bandwidth caused any technical issues. And, just because everyone is streaming on these public networks. So Janelle, like take a stab at that. And then if anyone else wants to weigh in.
Yeah, fortunately, the beauty of LiveU is it's not just reliant on one network. So I think, in the beginning, we saw a really heavy payload on your home internet. It's, especially when you're doing video streaming, people have experienced that even on the Zoom world. So we've seen a lot of people increase using LiveU because they're now adding cellular networks for redundancy to stream out of their homes. So the only place really that I've seen a higher payload is really at the broadcast center, because I think that some of my customers have not traditionally used LiveU as much as they've been using it now. So making sure that the stuff in the broadcast center has enough bandwidth. And also we've bumped up infrastructure in the cloud, relying on AWS instances for a lot of stuff that we're doing through, vMix and different cloud production software and that sort of thing. So from that perspective, we've definitely seen a more reliance on that. But again, nothing really service disruption. But a lot of stuff we learned, to be honest, even with integrating with other third-party applications, especially if people didn't have access to their broadcast centers. So. Yeah,
exactly. Anyone else have anything to add about, IP connectivity one way or the other?
I'm sorry.
The pro venues are all wired with fiber. We didn't see any disruption there. I've seen maybe a couple of instances where somebody happened to be on their laptop in the truck, there wasn't enough bandwidth, but very minimal. We've seen no problem in that regard.
Okay.
Yeah, and we've actually experienced some problems, and it's all part of the same issue. Is we have a lot of people that are working from home, and we have whole facilities where there's just nobody there anymore. So when you send people home to edit or send people home to create graphics or any of these positions you may think about, now you're beholden to whatever their bandwidth is in their homes. So, we could have all the bandwidth in the world going back into our network, but if you got some guy sitting out in the middle of nowhere, with like a dial-up modem, then it doesn't work. And then obviously they don't have dial-up modems, but and we've seen instances where again, depending on where the person lives and how many people in the neighborhood and what kind of load that node has and whatever their provider is, that services slow down and do cause some problems. I mean, it's much different than what Janelle's speaking about with live video, but the work from home infrastructure requirements, I think a lot of the providers have done a great job keeping up, but there have been instances where we've run into some slowdown issues with other ancillary positions, not so much on the production side, but more on the pre-pro piece of it.
Okay, thanks. Brad, any connectivity issues from Fox's perspective, and are you using, to Janelle's point, a lot of the big venues you have fiber running out, but are you using bonded more for some other job functions during a live broadcast?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think that, one of the big things that we've all learned in the last, 6 months has been the plan that was 12, 18, 24 months out and what we were going to do operationally and capital wise has been modified and accelerated in some cases. And so, while we, we're doing things and happen to be, customers of LiveU and use bonded cellular on a regular basis, our usage has definitely gone up and just to get announcers back on TV and things like that in the early days, we were, heavily relying on those systems to get us up and operating because it meant less people having to be in the building and do things. It was finally a distributed technology that allowed us, hooks and handles into things. And so, once that got back, obviously, look, the next step is, getting better bandwidth, getting more control, putting our own networks on top of things, providing links into people and providing, more reliance on our core network infrastructure instead of things about, finding ways to get people to join our corporate network through the New York office versus through the LA office or the Charlotte office, so that way we're reducing a link from somebody's home in New Jersey or Long Island into our own network and then transporting it on our private network across the US to the LA network center. So there are those pieces that are out there that, we continue to rely upon, but I will say that we're up, hundreds of % in using high-speed internet to do things that in the past we had used private dedicated internet for. So, there's definitely a lot of that's existing. We're relying a lot more on our VPN hardware than we had been in the past. And so, we're finding that, the networks have caught up and that it's been, good for all of us to be able to do these things and, again, put security fences around what we're doing so that we can, hopefully guarantee and make sure that we can do these shows. But, as Don said, unfortunately, in some cases, we are heavily reliant upon how many people on that street are playing Xbox and or are on Zoom at the same time to do these shows. And, we saw it, we have some places and some people that are on some pretty high profile shows for us that are relying on, some very robust yet, cable modems out there. And so there's always something that you don't know about that's happening and that we work with the providers to do. So it's, one of those things that were not possible 3 years ago are possible today and are going to be even better as we continue to expand down the road of, increased cellular connectivity and hopefully, the grand piece of it all is 5G, from that side. But, I think all of us are seeing more utilization on that. I can only imagine how high Don's bonded cellular bills were on the news side during those couple of months. I know how bad they were on my side, so I can only imagine, what they were. And that's the piece that's there is just continuing the evolution forward of making each piece of it better.
Yeah, we contributed to the 400% increase that Janelle's talking about.
Yeah, I bet. Just going back to that audio question about do you prefer no audio or some produced audio? It seemed like in kind of an even split from our audience, but 55% preferred having some produced audio to try to make it seem like more of a normal broadcast, which is interesting. And now we're asking people about whether they like virtual fans or not. I do want to take a couple more questions from the audience, and I think this might be two questions might kind of be asking the same thing. But there's a question about how you're doing highlights, for social media distribution or OTT, and highlights within broadcast. Is some of that stuff being done remotely, either at op centers or at home, and maybe some of the tools that you rely on, particularly for your employees at home. Brad, if you want to tackle that one, I think Fox has done some interesting things out in LA.
Yeah, I mean, the interesting part on the OTT side and our social and web stuff has always been kind of, had never been reliant upon being in the building. So, we've have, clipping programs and things like that are all HTML5 based. And so our teams have been doing that off site for a very long time because, as you know, social waits for nobody. So that's something that we've had for a good long period of time that we've been doing. And to be honest, we relied very heavily on our digital teams when we kind of launched back up, because to be honest, they were the people who had vMix and had LiveU in their hands and had that kind of accessibility that, to be honest, we kind of thumbed our noses at for a long time. As to didn't match things in quality, and we found out that it does now. And so we relied very heavily on them in the first month to do things, and they showed us, how they operated and did things and allowed us to do that stuff. And then, from an editing perspective and from kind of other stuff that's out there, we rely heavily on, PC over IP solutions from, a bunch of different vendors, because to be honest, as we probably all do in our facilities and our mobile units and that are out there, is that there's evolutions of equipment out there, and you don't get to wholesale replace the whole thing at once. So we use solutions from HP, we use solutions from Teradici to provide these kind of links that are out there, along with we do a lot on SRT with High Vision, and we do a whole bunch of we have a big black box KVM system that allows us remote access too. So there are a lot of tools out there that let you do it, and there are a lot of great companies out there that can help you do those things too. And so, it really is just kind of making work with what you have. There are a lot of companies out there that have good solutions that work with what your products are out there that give you that capability to run, these things on cable rooms.
Interesting. We have our answer on the virtual fans or an empty stadium. It seems like when it comes to video, our audience are purists. 56% prefer an empty stadium, but still pretty close. Don, anything? Are you producing highlights any differently with the COVID-19 workflows versus how?
Well, I mean, differently. I mean, sure, we're doing it differently because nobody's in the office anymore. So, like Brad, we have digital teams that. I don't want to say we thumbed our nose at, but they were always kind of off on the side someplace doing their own thing. And we took a closer look at how they were doing their jobs and embraced some of those workflows. We've also, like for editing, we didn't go out and just wholesale replace all our editing systems. So, Teradici, we use we have a pretty robust VPN system within the company. So we have people that are connecting to Avid or to whatever editing platform they may be using, to their desktops basically via like a Teradici type of thing. So there's the workflows change because of the person someplace else, but the actual back end of it hasn't changed at all for us. We're utilizing what we've had, but we're taking a close look at that now to as we move forward. Is there a better, more effective way to do that? And we think that there is, but that'll be in the future when we take a look at this more closely.
Thanks. Well, we spent a lot of time talking about the challenges of COVID-19 and some of the ways you try to normalize experience for viewers with empty stadiums. There are some advantages from a production standpoint to having empty stadiums, right? In terms of camera positions and such. Brad, can you weigh in on that? Are there new camera positions or microphones you can place now that you couldn't before?
Yeah, I mean, there are definitely a bunch of things we're able to do this regular season that normally we wouldn't have done in a regular season before, because we save that money in seat kills and things like that for the postseason. But where we can kind of control the stadium and they cannot sell certain seats for us, so we can put cameras in better spots. And so We definitely had some cameras at low home and at some different venues, things that are obviously the most expensive seats in a building. And so since there's nobody there, we're able to use those during the regular season. And there have been a lot of other people doing, kind of some even more interesting things on the regional level of that I'm sure Don can share. But, we really did try and find, new angles and new looks for things as much as we could, while not trying to make too much work for our teams and add too many people to the shows. But, one of the things that, we will see coming up in the National League Division Series when we take that on next week, is a number of cameras just, 6 or 8, 10 feet away from their normal spots in a better spot with a better angle to shoot through the nets and shoot through all the other things that have started to pop up over the years to kind of make these shows look a little better. So you'll see some of that in both Texas and both in Arlington and Houston as we launch the NLDS next week.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, Don, what about from your perspective? Were you able to use traditional cameras instead of specialty cameras for some points?
Yeah. I mean, like some of the traditional cameras for baseball, like foul line and base, mid-low cameras, they were able to pull them in more so they could be right on line with the foul line, because they were typically off angle a little bit. So with all that space, you can move them in. We buried a camera in the dirt at Wrigley Field for the Cubs. The NBA had used a rail cam down where courtside seats would normally be, which was a kind of an interesting angle there. So, but we didn't really go crazy with moving a whole bunch of stuff around. It was, I think most of the focus was on, let's try to get the game produced. And, if you can augment a little bit, that's fine. I think I mentioned earlier about RoboCams and dugouts because of the restrictions with operators. But we didn't do a whole lot of things, but where it made sense, we did. We tried to keep it as close to what we have been doing up to this point.
Right, of course. Right, and if you have new camera positions that are traditional, that means operators to run them, and you're not trying to add people to your base production. Phil, we chatted last spring. I was writing a story about where UHD sports production stood, and whether that's 1080p HDR or 4K. And it seemed just before COVID hit, it seemed like there was some good momentum towards doing a lot more of that this season. Where does that stand now? Obviously everything was put on hold for a couple months, and just doing basic HD production is an achievement in itself. But what's the pace of UHD from your perspective?
Well, I think the pandemic has certainly slowed the UHD deployment. We used to do 20 to 30 UHD events for the NBA. Those didn't happen in the bubble. We've done, UHD, 1080p HDR, or UHD for Fox. We don't see much of that happening. So it's taken a back bench, just simply because you didn't need, another layer of work or another layer of something during this complicated time. But I don't see any reason why it won't come back. 1080p HDR has become more and more accepted as the way to go, and then up converting that to 4K. But we still see some real UHD. So I think it's a little bit of a hiatus here, but I don't see any reason why it's not going to come back.
Okay. Fair enough. And Brad, from your perspective, what's Fox was sort of early on doing a lot of 1080p 60 and repurposing that last season. Where is UHD production, across the various sports?
Yeah, I mean, we're definitely behind on our goals for this year and what we had hoped to do. We'd hoped for a lot of regular season baseball that all went away as we stopped being able to put trucks into these venues. So, we were happy. Big noon kickoff. Our big noon football for us on Fox is 4K up converted to HDR. So it's a 1080p HDR production. being distributed in 4K HDR every Saturday. We hope that with the expansion of college football, to be able to do a bit more as well in that realm as we go forward. And then we will start with one of the NLDS series will be in 1080p HDR all the way through the World Series. So, our baseball commitment is back with a little bit of an expanded effort this year to add both the World Series and the NLDS from that side from us, and then Thursday Night Football launch in early October. So, we're trying to get back on track is where we're at this point. We definitely lost a number of sports due to the restrictions that we had this spring and summer, but I think that, like Phil said, it's turning back on, and I think that we're seeing more and more of it, not just from us at Fox, but from many people.
Okay, thanks. And Don, what about 1080p HDR and 4K for Sinclair's various properties? I think you've done some things with Tennis Channel.
Yeah, so right now, I mentioned Roland Garros, the French Open earlier. We are producing and distributing that in UHD to certain providers. So that's our first effort into that ever. So we're looking forward to that. We're also building a new technical operations center for the RSNs that is native 1080p with a certain number of 4K channels, 4K capable channels in that facility. So we as a company have always been huge proponents of 1080p 60 HDR, and we're going to go down that path when the time is right. But we're positioning ourselves now to be able to do that pretty quickly. So we see that to be where we want to end up as a sweet spot. And tennis on the 4K front lends itself to that a little better than baseball does, or hockey or basketball. But we're going to get there. We're fully aware of it, and we're building technology to support it. And then we certainly depend on Phil to have his trucks be able to supply that signal to us, which they can do. So.
Okay, thanks. I've done a couple webinars talking about the impacts of COVID-19 on news production, and a lot of it, the discussion was about the long-term impact of what things have changed on a temporary basis to kind of keep the lights on, that are changes that are going to be permanent. I'd like to ask a question of the panel. So we're coming near the end of our time. What do you see as the long-term impact of COVID-19 on sports production? Some of the more distributed productions that you're doing, as you all mentioned, at-home production isn't a new thing. People have been doing that for a long time, and everyone was moving to more distributed productions. But when you look at the cost savings from not flying people, not putting people up in hotels, and I guess quality of life, quality production things from having maybe the same people do more. Can you speak to that? I guess Phil, from your perspective. So
the biggest impact, in a sense, of the pandemic was the prevalence of the world feed. Lot more, before this summer, world feed was rarely mentioned as even a concept, and now we're doing tons of them. So, what the world feed does is reduce the number of people traveling and reduce costs. But we have pretty unhappy producers, right? They're not able to do what they want to do, as we talked about earlier. So the challenge that's presented by the pandemic for the future is, how do we keep the cost savings and keep the reduced travel, but get the quality of production back up to what it was? And I know my company, and I know other mobile companies are working towards solutions in that direction. And I think you'll start seeing them when NHL and NBA launch again in December or January.
Okay, fair enough. And Brad, what are some things that are different today than they were before COVID hit, and you don't think are changing? What are, maybe in terms of like truck movements and et cetera?
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing that we kind of saw coming and were planning for that got sped up as part of this was kind of our production anywhere model, which allows people to work on more programming more consistently with the same people, and really kind of leverages the feel of a home show or a travel A crew, where everybody's always working together on the same type of programming, whether it's football or college football or baseball or NASCAR. And that really helps, especially in sports that deal with a lot of changing crews and things like that. The ability to put your show in that location and still utilize the same people, understand the sport that's being played, understand the cadence and the thought process of the producer and director who are guiding the storytelling of that show, really makes a difference, because, they become a very well-oiled machine that can react quickly to things and also understand to sell storylines and other pieces of the broadcast as not only a camera operator or a replay operator, but a graphics person as well, of, finding out ways to tell that story and pot up that effects mic at the right spot to hear the right player talk about certain things. Are really important things that make our broadcast better and compel viewers and people to watch more and longer and all those cases. And so that's what we're really looking for is providing consistency to our production teams to provide the best product to our viewers. And so, we really do feel that production anywhere and what we're doing there and HRPs provide that model, because the less time we have people on airplanes, the more time they're producing events, and that's better for us in the overall. And not to mention that it's better on their lives, and it's better on, as you mentioned earlier, if you don't have to get up at 4 a.m. after leaving an event at 11 o'clock at night to get on an airplane at 6 to get to the next place, to do an event, to not sleep, to play that game in cycles, it wears on you over time, and you are not as effective an operator, and you are not as effective for the broadcast. And so the more time we can get people to sleep in any bed, let alone their own, which obviously definitely should help out a whole bunch, the better off we all are in providing the best product to our consumers.
Don, so we're actually on the prep call, we're talking about some of the vagaries of airline travel of these days. But yeah, what's your take on, is there sort of a permanent shift to more of this distributing? As we talked about in one of our prep calls, NEP down in Australia has created a model sort of akin to what people are doing here, where you have people in a couple different dedicated control centers, producing games all across Australia. Is that the model we wind up with here in the States?
I think eventually it is. I mean, COVID has accelerated this whole concept tenfold, probably. Brad's had plans. All the networks, any major sports producer has been thinking of ways to make this a more efficient and find ways to make the product better. And to Brad's point, when you got a guy who's getting up at 4 a.m, getting on a plane and going to do the same thing, I mean, it wears thin on people. I mean, for anyone on the phone that's done that, it's no fun after a while. But consistency from a production perspective is critically important. Being more cost effective, because the economics of this are changing, is part of the equation. But we're also very, and Brad and everyone is, we have to make sure that we're producing a product that the league and primarily the teams are happy with, because those are our business partners. And whatever we do, we will never sacrifice any quality just to save a few dollars. That's not the goal. The goal is to provide a consistent, good product that everybody can be proud of. And if we can do it more efficiently and effectively, that's a win for everybody. And that's where we want to get to in the long term.
Great. Well, I think that's a great comment to wrap up on. We've gone past our time, so I'd like to thank my panelists for their time. Thank the audience for their attention, and I wish you all a good afternoon.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
We're done.